So I'm Chris Beasley in SPHS, and this is Christy Baldwin over here. She's a psychology major. We'll be talking about a project that we've been working on since the beginning of the year, and a relationship that I've had with a program since 2013, and we're finally able to do some collaborative scholarship through that work. So first I want to tell you a little bit about the research lab that I work with. So I have a research lab called the Post-Prison Education Research Lab. And what we do is we hope to produce scholarship that's useful to people, that helps policymakers, programs, and scholars develop better support programs for people transitioning from prison to college. So we hope that we have use-inspired research. I don't really have time to go into a lot of the background data, but just as a sort of highlight of some of the data, about 3% of people in the United States have been into prison at some point in their lives. So if we look at other incarceration metrics, it's even higher, right? So it's becoming a point where some people call it an epidemic in the United States, with 3% of people impacted. And there are many secondary impacts that we see from incarceration: economic, housing, et cetera. But another place that's under-examined is inequities in higher education. Recently released data suggests that only 4% of people who have been to prison obtain a bachelor's degree, compared to about 30% of the population. There are a lot of different reasons that we could think of for why that might be, and I'll go through a few of those and sort of get to the point of sort of what I'm interested in. So one thing that we could think about is maybe people exiting prison aren't academically prepared for college. However, when we look at education data, we see that about half of people who are in prison have a GED or have some kind of high school diploma, right? So people are generally, at least half of people are academically prepared. So there's some other reasons that people might suspect for why formerly incarcerated people don't go to college. You can think about the overrepresentation of people from low SIAS backgrounds, overrepresentation of ethnic minority individuals, overrepresentation of people with cognitive disabilities, et cetera. When we look at I've been looking at some of those data on inequities lately, and those don't seem to really explain the considerable inequity here. We look at some of the hardest to reach ethnicities, Black men and Native Americans. We see that 18% of Black men complete a bachelor's degree, 16% of Native Americans. We look at people with disabilities. We see that 16% of people with a disability in general have a bachelor's degree. And for cognitive disabilities, it's about 12%, right? So even when we look at some of the most severe disabilities that impact higher education, we still see much higher rates. If we look at socioeconomic status, we see that 15% of people in the lowest quartile of socioeconomic status have obtained a bachelor's degree, so that's not really a good explanation either. One thing I don't want to get into with this slide is like the oppression Olympics, but more to just say that like these aren't really good explanations for why we see an inequity in formerly incarcerated people. So some other possible reasons might be structural reasons. So many colleges, about 60 to 80% of private colleges and universities screen for criminal history in their applications, and about 55% of public institutions screen for criminal history. We see that about 2/3 of applicants with felonies stop filling out the application, compared to about 1/5 of typical applicants stop filling out their application, right? So this is one possible structural reason. There are other people looking into this, and as a psychologist, I'm interested in other barriers. And as I've spoken with formerly incarcerated students and graduates, one of the things that commonly comes up as a barrier to them are more like internal barriers, psychological barriers, that perhaps they didn't think that college was a possibility for them, or they didn't think it was a good fit, or they didn't think the institution and the culture was a good fit. And so that's what I'm interested in my scholarly career, is these ideas of sort of transition and growth and transformation and some of those psychological barriers in that. And it seems to be something that formerly incarcerated people are interested in. We see that the two main interests of the formerly incarcerated community are, one, structural barriers, and two, these internal barriers. So in the Post-Prison Education Research Lab, we're asking questions like, what is this self-transformative process like? And the scholarly literature, we actually know very, very little about the process of self-transformation. Almost all of that literature looks at recidivism or reincarceration and the risk factors that lead to recidivism and reincarceration, rather than the process of self-transformation and growth. Very, very little understanding of what that process is like. So I'm interested in that process as well as the psychological barriers to that self-transformation. So one of the partners that I reached out to in trying to explore some of this process of self-transformation is the Education Justice Project, which is a program that I've had a relationship with since 2013. They provide upper-level humanities education programming in Danville Correctional Center through the University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana. I'll let Christy explain some of the work that we've been doing with that program, and then I'll come back to talk about some of the challenges and next directions.
So thus far, what we've been doing is developing a framework for self-transformation using the theory of possible selves and looking at the empirical and theoretical literature on the subject. So what is possible selves theory? It's a conceptual link between motivation, it's a link between our cognition and our motivation, and it also talks about the connections between your past, current, and future selves. Possible selves can be feared or desired, and they lead to motivation to act in ways that either bring you closer to or farther away from these desired or feared selves. We also believe that this motivation to act can also lead towards goals that will help potentially lead towards identity change. We believe that possible selves theory creates a potential for understanding and promoting self-transformation for formerly incarcerated people. So this is what we've been working on so far. It's our initial draft of the model of self-transformation. You read the model from right to left, and the arrows indicate the direction of influence. Factors that directly impact the relationship between two concepts are known as moderators. So we've got a few, some on the bottom over here, and one big one up top, and that one. And so moderators impact the likelihood that one concept will lead to the next, and they may strengthen or weaken the connection between concepts. I'm going to just briefly go over a few of the key points of the model in the interest of time. So who we were in the past, our past self, they influence who we think we are today. This isn't all available to us at any given time, so our working self concept is the parts of our identity we are currently working with. And who we think we are now influences who we think we can be in the future. The creation of these possibilities are influenced by many factors, including the context in which we live, current and past experiences, cultural messages, social models, and our identity schema. Not all of these possible selves may be activated, but if a possible self is activated by a context cue, it leads to this motivation to act because you now know that you could be this possible self. And as we gain motivation, we engage in self-regulatory behaviors that lead us closer to these goals. And we're hypothesizing that progress towards these goals can lead to identity exploration and a transformed future self.
So this is literature that we've been drawing on from possible selves theory and empirical work. There really isn't literature that has pulled all these ideas together into one framework. So we're hoping that this is an opportunity to not only consolidate the literature on possible selves and how that can lead to self-transformation, but to directly apply it to a prison education context and to develop the model with incarcerated scholars. So what we've done thus far is we've met with the currently incarcerated scholars. We've presented the model and asked for suggestions on that model and developed that model mostly internally. However, what we've run into is a considerable challenge in that prisons focus on security and threats to security rather than self-transformation and rehabilitation. And what I found is that I actually got kicked out of prison. And I've been in prisons in Illinois before. I've been in prisons in Washington before. Didn't experience any problems getting in, so I assumed that there wouldn't be a problem here either. And initially I was allowed in, but since they've told me that I can't come back in, they haven't given me any reasons why I can't come back in. Other people have been allowed in except me. So I can presume that it may be, I myself have been incarcerated, and that's sort of one of the challenges of trying to enter into these settings and work collaboratively with programs inside and work collaboratively with these scholars inside. But we're committed to continuing this relationship with the currently incarcerated individuals. Our backup plan is to work with alumni of this program, but we really want to give it like a year of continuing to try to work through these hurdles. We're committed to these guys inside and giving them the opportunity to be scholars, to present their narratives and how these narratives explain this model. So we hope to sort of develop this scholarly model, and in the future, conduct some qualitative research in order to present an alternative model of self-transformation from people's experiences and compare these different models with one another. So we're currently one of the things that we're doing is currently working through intermediaries. So we have some allies and volunteers in the program, and we hope to go through them. I've been told that I probably can't communicate in writing with the prisoners either. They won't allow me to do that. So we're trying to go through these intermediaries that are volunteers at the prison. So that's sort of a quick overview of the project, some of the challenges, and what we hope to do in the future to try to get around some of those challenges. So thank you.